Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
So we're continuing our conversation about starting your own business. This is part 2 of the conversation. If you haven't heard last week's or last episode's conversation, you might want to go listen to that because we set a lot of philosophical frameworks for how we think about starting your own business. And this is a time period when a lot of people might have time on their hands or they're having a reset button of life because of world circumstances. And it's an opportunity maybe for you to think about starting your own business, maybe from home. Maybe it's a physical business in the real world, or maybe it's an online business, but you probably have the opportunity right now to think in terms of starting your own enterprise. And so in the last episode, we laid the groundwork. In this episode, I want to talk a little bit about business models and what business models are available to you as you think about creating value in starting the business. Now, in the last episode, we talked a lot about value creation, how to think about value creation. We have a reframe of instead of seeing yourself as someone that brings solutions to the table, and now you're looking for people out there that have problems that your solution can fit to reverse that thinking and look out in the world and find out where the problems lie, and then find out how you can change yourself or grow or develop or hook what you know into providing a solution for those challenges. So it's falling in love with people's problems rather than falling in love with your solution. So it's a little bit of a shift in mindset. And in this episode, we want to talk a little bit about business models themselves, the mechanisms. We're going to get more tangible and talk about the mechanisms of value exchange, how that actually looks. Before we get into that, I did want to give book recommendations on the last episode. I forgot to. So I want to give those to you right now out of the gate that I think could be really helpful for you. 2 books by the same author. One of them we've done a podcast about, an entire podcast unpacking it. The first one is called The Cash Flow Quadrant. It's by Robert Kiyosaki. Many years ago on Personality Hacker, we talked about this model. He's got a really interesting 4-quadrant model of thinking about value creation, wealth, business building. It is one of the books that has shaped my mindset. Another book of his is Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It has also shaped my mindset and how I think about business and value creation. And I think it would be very beneficial for you to read these 2 books. They'd be very helpful to you, I think, in terms of value creation and how value is created in the world. He comes from a real estate background, so a lot of it's heavy with real estate language, and he wrote it back in the 2000s. So that was kind of when real estate was a big deal. But if you read these books, I think you can get into seeing some of the principles in them, even if you look past the business model of real estate itself. He has a lot of great ideas that he shares in those that have reframed me and some of the people I know that have gone on to become very successful. So I'd recommend those 2 books by Robert Kiyosaki. And if you're not into reading, of course, you can just listen to our podcast on the cash flow quadrant. It's literally called the cash flow quadrant, where we walk through his model and we unpack some of the principles there. So let's talk about business models. If you're thinking about starting your own business, I want to get real practical around some of the options you have on the table and some of the benefits and challenges with each of these business model ways of thinking. So first, let's talk about the difference between a service business and a product business. A service business is something more like having a job. It's kind of like owning a job in a way, right? You show up to someone's house. Maybe you have a landscaping business. The service you provide is you show up to someone's house and you help landscape their yard or their property. Maybe you have a window cleaning service. Maybe you have a plumbing service. Maybe it's a little more esoteric. Maybe it's a coaching service or a counseling or therapy service. You provide a service to someone, and they give you those little green tickets we talked about in the last episode as an exchange for that service. So that's one way to create value, is through a service arrangement with people.
Most professionals are service oriented. Like lawyers provide a service. Like it's not just people who own small businesses that do things, around the home or whatever, but like it's really any time that you're exchanging your expertise and your time for as the value you bring for money. And that's why it's a little bit more like a job, right? Like when you go to a job, you're actually providing a service to the company, right? They're hiring you or contracting you to provide your service to the company. This just cuts out the company as the middleman. It makes it so that you're the company providing the service as opposed to providing a service to a company.
Service businesses are synchronous. They're in real time. You can't deliver a service like next month if someone needs it now. You have to do it when they need that service. So it's immediate, it's real time. And what's great about a service business is there's usually a problem that needs to be solved. And if you can fulfill that problem or solve that problem right now, there's a value exchange that's created. So it's a great way to start out a business. It's one of the best ways to start a business, quite frankly, because you can deliver value immediately. And one important thing is you get feedback immediately based on the quality of the service you provide. So, if someday if you want to create a training course, and we're going to talk about product business in a second, but let's say you want to create a training product where you train somebody towards something, starting off by consulting or creating a service arrangement first to help coach them in real time, you get feedback to see how it's landing with them, how they're understanding the solutions you're providing. You're able to, in real time, calibrate and tweak the solutions you're offering to the person, and the money's up front. You get paid immediately because the service is rendered immediately. You don't have to put a ton of work in and hope that you're creating something that will sell later. Like you're selling the service before you provide it, basically, and then you go fulfill it. So the money is up front, and then the service is provided. Now you might get paid afterward, but the arrangement to pay you is up front, right? So this is a service business. It's a great way to start. It's quick money. It's one of the easiest ways to provide solutions for people. And oftentimes, this is a recommendation when you're starting a business to provide services first. Let's talk more about a product business. Products are basically time-bound services in a way. Now, they can be other things too, but ultimately it's time-bound. It's asynchronous. It's not in real time. You do the work to create the product. Let's say you are a computer manufacturer. That's a big business, but let's just say you had the ability to manufacture computers. You're putting the work in to manufacture a computer. You put all the work in. It might take a long period of time to develop this product. You pour everything into it. You create the product. You set the price, and now you take it to market to sell to people. So a lot of investment up front. You don't get cash before you sell the product. You have to create the product first. You have to come up with some capital to create this product. Or if it's something like a training course you create in your home, you have to take the time and energy to turn on a video camera or an audio mic and record it, write it, edit it. You've got to put all the effort, time, money, and effort up front, and then assume that someone's going to pay you for all that time and effort after the fact.
Right. Products are any widget, any physical, tangible thing that you interact with or engage with. That's a product. But it also can be digital things, like Joel was just mentioning, programs or apps. Apps are products, right? And the energy gets sort of bound into these products. Like they're a frozen energy. You take the energy up front and put it into this thing, and then other people, particularly if it's digital, a lot of people can benefit from one product you create. If you create an app one time, millions of people can experience and use that app. If it's a physical, tangible product, it's going to be more one-to-one, but your whole family could use it. Maybe it's like a coffee maker and the entire family benefits from it. Or it can be a personal item that only you use, like a piece of clothing. But products are frozen energy. The energy is put up front and frozen into this thing. And as Joel mentioned, the challenge with that is that while you're creating the product, all the investment is on your side up front. And so a lot of times you have to have some sort of investment or sponsorship. Like you can subsidize your own product creation with other ventures. You may have already created money in other ways, and then you use the money you created in other ways to free up some time to be able to pour into this product. Sometimes people subsidize creating products with day jobs, right? They have a day job, they get money from the day job, and then the afternoons, they donate and dedicate their time to creating whatever this product is. But it's more complicated up front. Initially, it's harder to do because there has to be some sort of subsidy that goes into the product creation. And sometimes you can actually get investments, right? Somebody else will invest in it. What's nice about services is that because they're more real time, there's a little bit more of sense of not mobility, but like there's a flexibility to it. And you might need to do some upfront investment in the equipment that you'll need to be able to do the service if equipment is required, and it almost always is. But there's less time investment. It's more about equipment, and once you're equipped, you already poured all of the time and effort you needed to get the expertise for it. That's usually the biggest investment, is the expertise, and then you're off to the races. But with services, it's also one-to-one. There's a limitation because you're the person who's providing the service. It can't scale. You're one person. There's only one of you, or maybe a small group of you. And so in order to scale, you have to replicate yourself in some ways, which is very difficult. With a product, all you have to do is replicate the product, which once you've figured out the system of creating the product to begin with, replication is much, much easier.
Yeah, with services, you can amplify, but you can't replicate. So if you have a service that's really good, like I met this guy once several years ago, he goes on to golf courses and helps them get into regulation around like being green and sustainable. And he said he won't even step foot on the golf course without a several $1,000 consulting fee because he has such a highly specialized skill. And so he's been able to generate a lot of revenue for himself, a lot of wealth for himself by increasing his fees per hour per consultation. And you can see lawyers and doctors are at some of the highest ends of this. You know, a really highly paid lawyer, he still only has 24 hours in a day. He or she has 24 hours in a day, but they can charge more per hour because of their competency, the skill set they bring.
The closest you can get is an understudy, which is why a lot of professionals end up going into mentorship and having understudies or people who work with them, because it's actually an attempt to replicate the service they provide, because there's only one of them and they have the expertise and the institutional knowledge, and that's, it's called from a lifetime of experience. And so then they try to pour it into somebody else who can be almost like a legacy plan. But it's very difficult to do that unless you get like a whole bunch of those people together. Like a law firm would be an example of a service that attempts to replicate itself. But that's because there's a standardization of, what it takes to be a lawyer. And so really the standard at the top is the thing that is being replicated, not the individual. But if you've got like a hotshot lawyer who's maybe even a celebrity lawyer, there's only one of them and they're almost impossible to replicate. And the celebrity lawyer is able to garner such high wage or such high prices because there is only one of them. It's a unique thing. So the challenge with services is that there needs to be sort of like a unique selling proposition that sort of gets folded into why somebody would want to pay you to do it. And it's hard to replicate that uniqueness. Whereas in a product, it's a little easier to replicate it because the system already got poured into creating the product itself, and then you just need to make more of those widgets. Or the product was created through a program, particularly a digital program, and then it's just a matter of creating the accessibility to it. And so there is a lot fewer challenges after the product is created in selling usually. I mean, you still have challenges with marketing and that sort of thing. We'll talk about that later. But once the product is created, it's now just a matter of trying to distribute it and get it in people's hands. But the upfront piece is much more complicated with the product. With services, it's much easier it's a lower barrier of entry, but it's much more difficult to scale it. And so you have to kind of choose which path feels more right for you. And a lot of times impact is a part of that. Now, some people have figured out how to solve that. Like a Tony Robbins is a person who has a service, but he does put it in a lot of products. He creates programs, writes books. He has the product of live events, but that's also a service.
He's
right?
amplifying his service through a live event.
Exactly. And so, but you don't get Tony Robbins one-to-one. Very few people do. Of all of the people who pay, I mean, I don't know, what is it, like $5, $10K to go to one of his events? I think it's $5K on some of them. Of all the people who pay $5K to be there, you actually there's like maybe a handful, half a dozen to a dozen people who get one-to-one interaction, and they're mostly being used as examples for the rest of the crowd, but they've created a system of understudies, lots of different coaches that have come through the Tony Robbins model, and they're really the ones that are providing one-to-one coaching, but they're not Tony Robbins, right? They might be Tony Robbins trained, but there's only one Tony Robbins. So the challenge with him is that you can't really replicate yourself. Now, that hasn't really limited him from being wildly successful, but I think he's worth like half $500 million. He's like worth $500 million. He may have hit his cap, right? Because there's only so much amplification you can do before you hit your cap. Versus look at some of these apps that have been created and the amount of money that the companies built around these apps have. Like Facebook is effectively a product of an app. The product is an online social water cooler. And that's a product they created. Now they have to manage it and maintain it, but it's still a product, right? You download the app and you engage and start using it. And that app has allowed, it's basically, that's all it is an app.
So it's a platform.
It's a platform.
An aggregator.
Yeah, exactly. And that little tiny app has garnered how many billions?
It's over 2 billion. users, I think, at this point.
Yeah. I mean, it's
Maybe more.
Yeah, it's kind of insane. And so it's like with products, there's less of a cap, but there's far greater barrier of entry. And even with the product itself, there's a bit of luck, right? Of getting to that place. Lots of hard work, but also a bit of luck and timing. For services, there's a little less luck that goes into it. And at the same time, there's a lot less scaling that can happen. So again, it's a matter of figuring out what fits better for you.
So it really depends on where you are on your timeline. If you're looking at products and services, and I think, let's simplify this down to saying, basically, if you're starting from scratch, one of the lowest barrier of entry, Antonia, like you mentioned, is starting a service-based business. Finding, like we talked about in last episode, the starving crowd, the people that have problems that you can figure out a solution to help solve. You figure out how to help solve that, and now you offer that as a service to those people, right? You already have the audience. They're already there. You already see their problems. They're hungry for a solution. You show up with a solution. Boom, you've got a service business almost overnight if you connect all those parts. Now, that sounds more simple than it probably actually is. I'm way oversimplifying it, but it's a great place to start. And maybe you've already started that. Maybe you are a coach or somebody that consults with businesses or personal, one-to-one people, and you help them find out their life mission. Maybe you help them with, understanding certain technologies to help their life be better. Maybe you're a nutrition coach. You help them get healthy or eat better. That's basically a service business you're providing. You're doing exchange for your time and effort to provide the solution for this person to learn something or calibrate or understand something. And then you're like, well, I want to amplify that. You could go into amplification, which would be run live events and still do the same thing you do with somebody one-to-one. Now you're doing it 1 to 50 people coming to your live event, but you're still giving that hour of your time. It's still a service you're providing. Or you might amplify it by having group coaching online with multiple people. So you're not just doing one person, you're doing maybe 12, 20 people in more of a group coaching fashion. Maybe the price point's a little lower because there's more people, so there's not as much individualized attention. So you flex and flow on that, but you're able to reach more people. You're able to amplify the service you're providing. If you want to create that turn that into a product, though, now we're talking about figuring out the leverage points and almost anticipating what challenges the majority of people that have these problems will be facing, because you can't personalize every single product to each person that purchases it. So this takes a little more creativity, a little more test iterate sometimes, and a little more forethought into how will this land? How is this actually going to help somebody on the other end? Like, how can I replicate a sense of that one-to-one experience with the person on the other side that they can do the learning on their own? They can maybe consume the product. I'm putting this in a framework of like an online business, right? Kind of like what we do with coaching and products and services, just to give you a sense of how this looks. And transitioning that into a product takes a little bit more forethought.
A lot of times when people create products that are things closer to widgets, a lot of times that did start out as service as well. Somebody who maybe creates a widget for a car may have started out as a mechanic and understands the needs in a car. And I think it's really wise to start out in the service space because, like you mentioned before, you get a lot of real-time feedback. And so a lot of the problems that we think people are having are not exactly the problems that they think they're having. And so you get really good at, when you're in a service position, you get great at calibrating against what's actually happening in the outside world, because we can't help but sort of project a layer of ourselves on top of everything. And if we're a person who's figured out a solution, we may have forgotten, because that's oftentimes a journey, we may have forgotten what it really feels like to be at the beginning of that journey. We might have forgotten what it felt like or how we defined it because we've learned so much through the solution. And so if you do a service industry, it kind of reminds you of what's going on for the person where you used to be and what language they're using around it and the ways that they're experiencing their problem and challenge. It's very grounding, actually. Doing a service industry or service business of any kind, whether it's a mechanic or a life coach, it's very grounding for what's actually going on for other people. And you get so much wisdom. You get so much wisdom in servicing other people that if you're going to turn that into a product, you want to spend a considerable amount of time taking notes, really figuring out, what were the leverage points when you were doing the one-to-one, like what were the highest quality pieces of information, or the highest quality acts that you did before you then bind it into a product or program that can't really be changed very easily. Once you create that product, there's less flexibility there. It's nice in a service because you can just sort of flex and flow. It's very easily modified. In a product or program or something that is time-bound, it's done. And to go back and redo it is very time-consuming. So getting all of that information through the service component, I think, is effectively crucial before you get into the product game.
So one of the best places to start, I believe, is by providing a service and then taking the learning you get from that and turning it into product. And what product allows you also to do is to replicate and time bind outside of your own efforts. So someone can come to your website, maybe you're creating like physical things on Etsy. You can go and maybe create like a really nice piece of jewelry. Maybe you have a great system for creating multiples of them. And now you're sleeping at 3 o'clock in the morning, someone's surfing online, they purchase your jewelry, the next day you ship it out. That effort was asynchronous from the transaction. The product and the transaction the product creation and the transaction were not like a service. They're separate from each other. And you can now have more time and flexibility when you have a product service now, or product business. Now, I think a mature business would have a little bit of a blend of both. So if you're a life coach or somebody that's talking online or helping coach people, weaving maybe a product or two into your repertoire or your catalog, having maybe a book you write, something that you have that's a tangible thing that lives outside of you, that time binds what you know, is very valuable to have to augment some of the services. And it really depends on what you like too. Some people just really love showing up and being in the service industry. They love the one-to-one experience. They don't want to create a product because they don't really want the detachment from their audience or their people they want to help. They love the fact of helping people one-on-one in real time. Other people don't like the communication with people one-on-one very much at all. They'd rather just have these products they offer and be more passive about their business. So it really depends on how you're wired too.
Yeah, well, and if you do a product business that doesn't have a service component, then the next best thing is market research. You can't ever lose touch with your client or customer. You have to know your audience. So if you are creating a widget, or maybe you, make porcelain cups, like there might not be a service industry element in there, but you might want to check in and make sure that people are happy with the product that they're receiving from you and do a lot of market research and figure out what needs to be altered or changed in future iterations. But it's really important to not lose that connection to the person who ends up receiving your product.
When we talk about a person receiving your product or your service, there's different categories of people. I don't mean like quality of people, but I mean the type of person that might purchase something from you or hire you for your services. And so this is kind of another part of the business model distinction here is there are business-to-business businesses and business-to-consumer businesses. This may be something you've heard before. You may be aware of this, but for somebody that may be new to the world of business, starting off for the first time, this is also something to think about. You thought about products versus services, but you also want to think about who is your customer. Is it a business entity or is it an individual? And there's a little bit of a difference here too.
Normally it's called B2B, which is business to business, or B2C, which is business to consumer. So if you're selling to an individual person, that is a B2C business. And if you are selling to another business, that is a B2B.
So the differences here, if you're selling to individual consumers, one person, your price point is probably going to need to be lower because it's not a business purchasing from you, a product or service from you. It's an individual, probably with their own family, their own life, their own job. They can't spend like $10,000 for the service you provide because they probably just don't have that. So your services have to be packaged in a way that's a smaller price point. However, the ease of sale the sale becomes easier because you only have one person and their wallet or their pocketbook to contend with. On the other side, business to business, when you go into a business, let's say you're a business consultant, you're still selling a consulting service, but you're selling it to an enterprise business, maybe a 50, 100 employees, and you go in to sell to them, the price point can be very high. You could be in the thousands, tens of thousands, if you're really high level, hundreds of thousands of dollars for your services. And the sales cycle is longer. It takes more stakeholders are in the mix, right? You talk to one person, like, well, I got to talk to my vice president. I got to talk to the president of the company, put a proposal together. It might take like 6 to 8 months to sell that service to that business. And so the sales cycle's longer, but when you land the sale, when you actually get the contract to provide the service, the money can be large. It can be an entire windfall, kind of feast or famine situation. So the price point's higher, but the sales cycle's longer. And with consumers, the price point is typically lower, but the sales cycle is shorter. It might be an impulse buy on Etsy. They're surfing, they see the bracelet you made, it looks awesome. They hit buy, they put their credit card in, boom, you've made the sale within a few hours or even less, a few minutes at that timeline. So this is a little bit different on this. And the other thing is the ease of, how do I say this? Consumers are more fussy than businesses as well. My experience in selling to businesses. So when you go in to be a consultant with a business, like we've consulted with Zappos before, it's a joy to work with a business because it's not the person's money they're spending, it's the business's money they're spending. So there's less fussiness. They want results, they want to be quality, but they're also invested in a good relationship. There's more at stake for them. They're not going to be as fussy about the details of like how it struck them personally if it gets the needs met of the goal they're trying to accomplish.
You mean there's less at stake for them if it goes awry because they can usually find an alternative path.
Yeah.
The only time that it becomes a really big issue is if time is of the essence.
Or if their job might be on the line. Like they hire your company or your consulting to come in and work with them, and now you've like screwed it up and now they lose their job over it.
Yeah, if you're a B2B business and you're like team building, they're going to be far less fussy than if you're, say, their network administrator and you've gone in and messed up their network. So there are certain things, if it's like the backbone of their business and you're responsible for that. But also the person who's their network administrator is getting a lot more money generally than the team building person who came in, because they're paying top dollar to make sure that this person is responsible, is there, and businesses, unlike consumers, understand that you usually get what you pay for. It takes consumers a long time to get this principle. Consumers are almost always looking for a deal, right? And because consumers are dealing with businesses, and the assumption is that businesses can absorb loss, then they're trying to make sure that the business is absorbing the loss they got from that consumer. You know, like people who are like extreme couponers, and sometimes extreme couponers will go in, get like $50 to $100 worth of groceries, have so many coupons that the store or whatever now owes them money. Like it's really weird sometimes with extreme couponing. And so consumers oftentimes get into this mentality of like, I'm going to get the best deal. Businesses don't do that. If they tried to get the best deal, so to speak, a lot of times that's bitten them. And it's not really their money anyway. So they're more generous with the amount that they're willing to pay because they want quality. Quality is way more important than nickel and diming. And so that's why businesses are usually a lot bigger windfalls. But as you mentioned, Joel, they're harder to land because they're looking for quality. They usually want lots more credibility behind you. There's got to be some element. Oftentimes it's like who you know and who you've worked with and what are the testimonials and what looks professional. I mean, there was a time period where you went in and pitched a company and the guy just didn't like that you didn't have business cards. Like it was stupid. Like you didn't have business cards because there was no reason to have a business card. You had an entire website set up. You had online representation. You didn't really want to, there was really no reason to, kill trees for business cards. But there was just something in him that said, if you're legit, you have a business card. And you didn't have it. You're like, I don't actually carry business cards, but here's my website, blah, 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 blah. And because you didn't have a business card, the guy was like, nope. But it meant something to him when he was first vetting you around that. Now, of course, a lot of other businesses haven't given two craps about that. It was just that one dude. But the vetting process initially is much tougher. And then you don't get paid as quick. Like most businesses have a 30, 60, 90-day out that after you bill them, and this is part of how like money flow works in businesses, you might not get paid for 90 days after you render the service or sell the widget. And so like there's a much longer cycle of landing it and getting paid both in the front and the back end. So you might get $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 from this company, and you wouldn't have, it would have been really complicated to get that from individuals, very difficult. But if you had gotten it from individuals, it would have happened now, Whereas with a business, it might not happen for 6 months. So it's definitely a very different dynamic that you have to also balance out.
And when you consult with a business, especially if you're by yourself, a solopreneur, they're absorbing all of your time and effort and energy. And so you have one client thinking, like you have one, maybe a couple businesses you're consulting with that pay you a lot of your annual revenue or your monthly revenue. And if you lose one, that's a significant hit. Whereas if you're on the consumer side, your price points are lower, but you make it up with quantity. And so if one consumer gets mad at you or you does not happy, asks for a refund or drops out, you're providing a service to, you can absorb that easier because it's safety in numbers of the numbers of people, the quantity of consumers engaging with your business.
Yeah, sometimes that can really trick you into thinking you're doing better than you actually are. I mean, we had a friend that had a business that she grew to like 1.2 million a year, but 80-90% of that was one client. And when she lost that one client, like it devastated the business. We are primarily business to consumer. Most of what we do is in individuals. And it makes it much more difficult to build. Like, I mean, our business isn't even close to 1.2 million a year, but it's more in touch with individuals. And you get a person who doesn't like something you did, and they write a scathing email, and you reach out and you try to make sure everything's okay, but there's just, they just got something up their butt or whatever. And you go, okay, well, we can just, part ways and it's going to be fine. And then you've got all the other people who I'm in a good relationship with. So you also end up on some level, if you do a service or product in a B2B model, but all your eggs are in one basket, like there's kind of a sense of a lack of freedom there too, because you have to go up, over and above to make sure you're courting this one client and making sure they're happy. In some ways, you're kind of owned by that relationship. Whereas when you do B2C, you're not really owned by anything except for the responsibility to your audience.
If you can sell a lot of product to a business, that's also another business model that's valuable, where you're not selling your consulting services, but maybe you have developed some type of a widget. Maybe it's some kind of an online training or something that you sell per person in a business, and you can have a lot of sales. I know my family runs a summer camp, and it's a Christian summer camp. And so one of the things they do is they contract with churches to bring their youth groups up. And so they talk to one youth leader, and that's anywhere from 30 to 100 students coming from one youth leader making a decision. And so it's a way to, it's kind of a service, but it's a way to amplify or augment it. So these are just some things to be thinking about as you're embarking on maybe starting your own business. Which direction do you feel you want to go? Sometimes you have to chase what the opportunities are. You might identify that the problems just always lie in enterprise businesses. Businesses seem to have the problem that I've identified here. It's really not at the consumer level. It's mostly at the business level, and I'm going to provide the solution for that either through a product or service. Maybe it's not a business thing. Maybe it's more, if you're talking about relationships or health and wellness, you're probably going to be more focused on consumers, and you find there's a challenge here with consumers and their relationships. You're going to be focused on maybe individuals or couples, and that's going to be more of a consumer model. So it really depends on what problems you're identifying with. When you fall in love with following the problem trails and figuring out how to provide solutions for those problems, that's going to dictate which direction you're going. But it's good to be aware of this, of how these two avenues of business to consumer versus business to business manifest, some of the pitfalls, some of the challenges, and some of the opportunities in both of these strategies.
Well, and knowing yourself too. I mean, I know that we're talking about kind of focusing more on what's going on for the other person. And I think I think more people need to focus on that piece because we are wired to be more self-centered when we enter business. So it's good to train yourself to, be less about the subject, the me, and more about the object, the other person, and to kind of think in those terms. But there is a point where it's important to understand yourself and what is motivating and incentivizing for you. Like, you do have to infuse a big part of who you are. Are you a person that just enjoys service, right? Like, you just enjoy providing services. There's a connection to the audience or a connection to the end client or customer, and you just really love engaging and interacting with them. And so that lights you up, and it makes it so that it's worth it to do it every day. If you're that kind of person, stay in a service industry. If you are the kind of person who just finds that annoying or obnoxious, or you hate having to deal with a client or customer, but you're really good at pouring everything into something that has leverage and is replicatable, then focus on products. know yourself well enough to know which one is more right for you. We don't do as much B2B. We started out doing B2B, right? Business to business. But we went to business to consumer pretty quick. And one of the reasons is because of me. Like, I just like dealing with consumers more. I just do. We have done business to business, but I always, like, there's a corporate game that I'm particularly bad at playing.
It's very extroverted thinking.
Yeah, it is. It's like a very extroverted thinking or effectiveness game that I'm like, I have to dress up like what? I have to talk like what? Like, I'm just like, oh man, can I just get on a podcast and start talking about how I think? Like, do I have to play this game? Do I have to have business cards? And so I can do the B2B thing because that's how we started out. And honestly, that subsidized being able to create products. Like, that was part of this, that was the service that we rendered that subsidized us getting to a product game, and also an ability to be a service to consumers, because it's harder when you're doing service to consumers to get that money flow in as quickly. So business to business, if you can land it, if you can find a way in, it's good money up front. And also, there's a lot of people who just excel, like that's their world. And I'm not saying this is an ENTP thing, by the way. We have plenty of profile training students that are ENTPs who thrive in business contexts and do very well. This is just kind of a me thing. And I'm a little spoiled in this, quite honestly. We have had other business to business opportunities, and I have to admit, every once in a while, I'm like, why am I such a dick about this? Because it really is much better money, and we really could go do that. And if I would just like play ball a little bit better. And I've realized that this is an attitude I come with. So I need to do better myself, because there are, quite honestly, there's some leverage that working with businesses has that you can't have with consumers, because consumers are individual people. Businesses have, well, it's concentrated energy, isn't it? It's like you get a business is all these mobilized people's energy, all of this attention poured to certain directions. And when you have all that energy being poured into one entity, it's going to have a bigger impact in its environment, right? It's just going to. And sometimes one of the things you have to do, if you're a person like me who has an attitude, is you have to realize that if you actually want to have impact in the world, sometimes you just have to acknowledge that the bigger entities have more impact. Individuals, it has impact in individual people's lives, which in my opinion is important. You know, that whole like, save a life, save the whole world. I do believe that having impact on individual people is important, but it also has a limitation of reach. If you want more reach, if you want bigger impact, if you want to do scale, business to business is oftentimes a better place to go. So there is a lot of benefits to doing business to business. And also sometimes you lose touch with the individual, right? And I like to keep touch with the individual. So personality hackers kind of become a bit of both. We favor business to consumer, but we will still do business to business, you know, when I can stomach it. And I know I have an attitude, and I know that's my problem. But we do business to business at times. I mean, we still get consulting gigs with businesses at times. And it is rewarding and it is positive. And so if we wanted to have a bigger impact, though, like you and I, Joel, I actually think that we could do more of that. And what's nice about business to business as well is that it actually gives you a lot of credibility. It gives you a lot of career capital, which I think is nothing to sniff at either.
I am so enjoying a business decision we made recently to do these small mentorship groups, where from a business standpoint, the price point is such that there's a lot of time invested and effort invested. And on paper, you could look at it and be like, well, you know, you can't scale it and all this, but it is so personally rewarding to connect with people one-on-one and in small groups and talk to them, connect with them, help like see stuff and spot stuff that maybe they're not seeing in their lives, and learning from them and really understanding where they're coming from. My heart is open, and I've really enjoyed doing things that don't scale lately, like in these mentorship groups. It's been very personally rewarding to work with people one-on-one. And I think you talk about how you're wired, how somebody's wired. I'm realizing I like scale. I like to think big. I like to think in terms of replication and, you know, growing things. And also I realize that my introverted feeling, that connection of me, not my extroverted thinking, scale, resource, etc., that heart connection is so important, and it's fueling me personally, and it's rewarding personally, that it's way more valuable than any transaction I could charge for it. Like, it's just such a rewarding experience, and I like that. And I think that's part of this decision for you as you're starting your business listening. What is personally rewarding to you as well? I mean, you should factor that in. That is an important thing to think about.
Yeah, the ROI is spiritual, actually. And I don't think that a business precludes that. I think you can absolutely weave in those kinds of things. And in fact, a lot of times a business is something that facilitates that way more than a day job can. I mean, there are very rewarding and spiritually rewarding careers. You know, people do a lot of, whether it's for-profit or non-profit, they work for companies they believe in. Again, all of that energy that gets concentrated in a single entity, and it can have real impact. And I think that that's really important. But a lot of people are working jobs that it's covering their bills, right? And they enjoy it, but it might not be spiritually rewarding. And I think what's nice about going into enterprise for yourself, if you can hack it, is that you have an ability to create those spiritually rewarding opportunities, which I think is important. I think another example of this is we were doing ProFlyer training for a long time as an entirely digital program. Like we would let everybody know a new class opened up, and the class was primarily digital content and some interaction online. And then we turned it into a live program structure so that we could actually meet students and engage with them at those live events. And it was a total game changer. Not only do I think that it made the program itself so much better, but it allowed us to, I don't know if it actually limited our scale or amplified it, but it made it so that we could be in the energetic space of the students and they could be in our energetic space. And so, you know, it made it so that it wasn't just learning a skill. It made it so that it turned it into like a real community. And I think that that's maybe my favorite example of being able to use the business that we've created in a way that is also not just spiritually rewarding for us, but also hopefully has a very spiritually rewarding impact on the end user, on the consumer. And so, yeah, again, I think that that's really important.
We had to limit class size, though, the scalability of it. It costs a lot to run a live event. I mean, the last live event we ran in the People's Republic of California, and they charge insane taxes.
I don't think we can do it again.
And I'm not probably gonna go back to California after that.
I know.
But it was cost and it limited, and yet the quality and the personal reward was bigger in that aspect. So I think that's something we learned too in this. And like, there's a lot of ways to look at business and the way you construct things, and we're realizing we can tailor it to how we're wired and what rewards us personally, not just financially, but spiritually rewarding, like you're talking about. I think that's a really great point. The other thing, too, is a distinction here between the systems you use to transact your business. So we've talked a little bit about service businesses versus product businesses. We've talked about business to business versus business to consumer. There's also this idea of using someone else's platform and owning or building your own platform. So, for example, it's much easier if you're creating videos and trainings to go to a service that hosts video trainings. They have transactions and the ability to sell. They take a percentage. You upload your course. Maybe you're teaching your product course, or maybe you're a coach and you join some coaching, conglomerate that helps route people that need coaching for what you offer to you. So they help you get clients, and you're on somebody else's platform, which can be really, really beneficial. And this works for a lot of people. It's a great starting point to get past the barrier of entry of starting up.
So you're talking about things like Udemy. Udemy would be if you're going to create a program like a digital product that teaches. Udemy would be a platform,
correct,
that you could upload to. Or even if you wanted to create content, visual content, like in videos, YouTube would be a platform. And that way you don't have to create your own digital player, and you don't have to have your own hosting space. You can just use the platform that YouTube created. Lyft and Uber are platform businesses, right? Like you have your own car and you do your own, like you pick up clients and drop them off, but everything is done through the technology that Lyft and Uber and other, rideshare, companies like that. They're a platform. And so you have the nimbleness of being able to be, like sort of solopreneur, but then you have the advantage and the convenience of going through somebody else's system. And so that's what you mean, Joel, when you say a platform business.
Absolutely. And the value that platform provides primarily is trust. Like you trust the Uber driver because they're going through that platform. Most people trust their Uber driver because they're going through that platform. There's a rating system. There's a way to create a trust relationship. And also it's just convenient, right? If you wanted to start your own car service, you'd have to take out advertising online. You'd have to figure out how to get to people when they're waiting for a vehicle. They'd have to call your number. Like at this point, it'd almost be impossible to start your own private car service because Uber and Lyft have made it so convenient with such high levels of trust. Even if there's breakdowns in trust sometimes, ultimately, we mostly trust these systems and these platforms.
Well, and you can see how successful platform companies are when you're like, the idea of competing with them with rideshare is crazy. So platform businesses can be crazy successful, especially if they're a really good idea. And platform businesses they've always been a thing, but I think that you can see the mastery of truly mastering platform businesses now. And they're everywhere. Like most social media is a platform. Most of the entrepreneurial, but hooking into somebody else's system, all of those are platform businesses. So platforms are really powerful to a place where they're almost taking over. And they're very, very, very powerful. But one of the reasons why is because they're so convenient. And in the last podcast, we talked about Graves 5 or Orange kind of becoming a median for most people. And I think that is massively facilitated by platform companies. Platform companies are making it easier and easier and easier for people to see opportunities of starting their own business or doing gig work, or like platform companies might be the thing that officially puts the median of society into Graves 5.
If you join the platform, though, you are handing over some control to that platform. So the decision you have to make when you're starting your business is, do I want to engage with a platform? And it might be a good way to start out, right? But they're going to take a higher percentage. They have more control. If they don't like what you're doing, they can turn off your enterprise, your store, your message, whatever it is. So you're benefiting from maybe the ease of starting out, but you also have less control when you engage with a platform. So being able to create your own platform is something you might also think about. Now, it's a little bit more involved. It's a little more difficult to do. We've made the decision to build most of our own platforms here. We have our website and we sell things through the internally built platforms. We use third-party solutions, but we've constructed it all for ourselves. So we're not selling our digital courses, for example, on Udemy. We're using our platform. Now, our book is published through a traditional publisher and is online on like Amazon and booksellers that way.
Well, and also most of our what's called freeline content, that's usually on other people's platforms, like on YouTube or other places like that. So we take advantage of platform companies when it comes to our freeline content. But when it comes to our premium content, we've decided to keep the control on our side, which quite honestly means that we have to do our own marketing. It means that a lot of responsibility comes on our shoulders. Whereas if we were on a platform like the Udemy, they would be doing marketing on our behalf. And so there are advantages to other platforms. It's a lot. Quite honestly, it's a lot easier, but you're paying for that ease.
And I think maybe this is my Enneagram 6 and introverted sensing inferior part of me. It's also more risky because you're giving away a lot of power to that platform. And I think platforms getting more and more powerful can be positive, but it also presents challenges, and I'd like to have alternatives to those things as well.
Yeah, like YouTube gets nuked, and suddenly every video you've ever created, right, is gone, unless you're like Joel and you get 40 backups and 100 different hard drives. Well, 40 backups and 40 hard drives. But there's a challenge that your content on some level isn't 100% owned by you. It is, like, you can always like repurpose it later depending upon if you've created any contractual obligations with people. But there is a bit of a challenge there. You will stay smaller and it will be a harder road if you don't utilize these platforms. It is much more difficult. Like, the onus of marketing is 100% on us for our programs. And so we have to do things like create a podcast every week. And we have to send out emails on a regular basis. And, it kind of sometimes feels icky to do marketing. You've got to learn copy. Copy is the style of communicating to your audience in a direct way that lets them know what you want from them and lets them know what you have to offer to them. And sometimes people don't want to learn that. They don't want to learn how to write copy or market in a certain way. And you will, by the way, there's a lot of people out there who just hate that this is a reality, hate that marketing is a reality. And if you're putting out marketing messages, you will get some hate back from them. Like it's invariable. Like you will always get marketing or messaging back that doesn't like whatever you're doing marketing wise. So you take a bit of a hit. Whereas if you're doing a platform like Udemy, they absorb all of that, right? You don't have to hear those messages back. You don't have to absorb negativity as much because they're the buffer that does that. You usually are just kind of dealing with feedback, like general ratings. But they, if I'm not mistaken, they'll deal with your refunds. They'll deal with a bunch of other stuff. So when you choose to be your own platform, you're going to absorb a lot more of the results of a direct relationship with your customers, which can be a little demoralizing sometimes, but at the same time, it also is very grounding. Like you get a lot of really honest feedback, and you've got to figure out, one, whether or not you're going to take it, if you're going to listen to it, which I think over time you pattern recognize what's the feedback you should be listening to and what's the feedback you can ignore. But it also gives you a lot more to work with as you're making your products and programs or widgets or whatever better over time. So there's benefits and deficiencies to both styles.
I would say that you still have to market either way. The platforms that are out there allow browsing, like stumbling upon and browsing, and there's some marketing. But ultimately, if you want to be successful, whether you're building your own or whether you're using somebody else's, if you want to hit higher levels of success, you're still going to have to put yourself out there and promote in some way. So it's still a skill. And we can talk about that, in the future on how that might look for you, maybe based on your personality or based on how you're wired. But just think in terms of which platforms am I associating with and how does this help or hurt or challenge or support my business model that I'm constructing, whether it's B2B, service, product, business, consumer. That platform is just one thing to be thinking about. And then finally, the thing I want to talk about today is the customers themselves. There's kind of this thing in business. It's 7 times harder to go get a new customer than to continue selling to a customer you've already attracted. So if you have products and services that are maybe lower price points or entry point products and services, and you deliver on that in a really significant way, you actually solve the problem this person had at the level that they brought that problem to you or the problem that they had, they're probably going to look at you for more solutions in the same vein. We talk a lot about personality types. One of the things we start with is helping people understand who they are, how they're wired. Maybe an INTP comes in and gets our starter kit, learns how to grow their co-pilot of extroverted intuition. We deliver on the goods. We show them the value of solving some of the challenges in their life. And they go, you know what? I also have this relationship challenge in my life. I see you guys have a product and service map for this. You have something that can help me with this in my life. I want to continue doing business with you. I want to continue engaging with your products and services in the same vein of helping me increase the opportunities and benefits and relationships in my life. And so it's so much better that if you have a business where you attract customers in and you're able to service them over the long term by giving more and more products and services that continue to solve the problems that come up for them, you have a really thriving business. And so I would think also in terms of the sustainability. A customer is more valuable 5 years from now than they are today when they first buy from you. And this also allows you to reframe how you're thinking about charging for things. We don't charge for the podcast, for example. We give away, I believe, really high quality value here in the podcast for free. You owe us nothing. We ask you to rate it and review it if you feel inclined to do so, but you actually owe us nothing. You get this free from the kindness of our heart. If you're more interested in the things we do, we invite you to come over to our website and look through our product catalog of things that could maybe benefit your life. And you're under no obligation to do that either. But we're able to think in terms of giving away a lot because we know that the value is created with people that resonate with what we talk about over the long term. We have profiler training students that signed up 6-7 years ago that still, when we release a new program or service, they will invest in it, because they've seen how this stuff changes their life that we've created. And so the value of that person, they're in a relationship with us then. So think in terms of sustainability in relationships. And this is a challenge I see a lot. If you've been on YouTube recently or Instagram or any of these online platforms, you've seen these typically they're young people in their 20s that must have bought a course on how to sell things online. And they're like, hey, you want to learn how to make money? I'm going to show you the 3 steps you need to do. And they like do this whole pitch. And it doesn't feel like they're in it for the long haul with me. If I signed up for their program or product, it feels like they want to take my cash, give me the product, deliver it. They're probably actually giving good exchange of value. They may have more things on the other side of that paywall that they would offer me. But it just feels like it's a quick hit for them. And I think I'd like for us, if we think about starting businesses, to think in terms of sustainability, things that we can offer value for the long haul. You may not have to do it for 5 or 10 years, but think if I was going to do this business for 5 or 10 years, how would I set up the value offering, what I help, the solutions I give to my customers, the people that have the problems I've already wired myself to look at? How do I really invest in them? How do I make their success, their solutions, my concern? How do I think in terms of how can I really make sure they get the value out of this and delivering 10, 20, 100 times the value that they give you? So the bio survival tickets, those little green tickets they hand over to you, if they hand over 10, you should deliver like 100 value back.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to say with the podcast, it's not free for the person listening. They did pay something. You, the listener, paid something. You paid us your attention. And attention is valuable. And so when a user, an audience member pays attention, but then what they paid attention to delivers way more than they were expecting because they only paid attention. They didn't also pay in representations of their time and energy. I mean, time in the sense of the time that you gave us while you're listening to this, but not time that got bound into the labor that you were, that was basically asynchronous, right? With the little green bio survival tickets, your money, right? The money that is represented in the job you went to or the career you went to, and you didn't have to give us that. You just had to pay attention. And then we delivered enough to make it so that had you paid money, you would have still been satisfied. That creates a relationship. That creates a very strong relationship because you know that we're willing to give first, right? You gave first with your attention, but then we over-delivered on what we gave back. And now there's trust built. Now there's credibility. And so you're far more likely to go, well, if they're willing to give this to me only paying attention, what are they willing to give to me when I actually pay money? And then at that point, it's incredibly important as the person who creates a product or program or service to keep over-delivering, right? Like you said, Joel, if they paid you $100, make it worth 1,000. If they paid you $1, make it worth 100. Like over-delivering is an incredibly important part of the relationship of maintaining that credibility with your end user. And I was also thinking about specifically our product. Like we have you could call it an educational product. You could call it a personal growth product. I prefer personal growth over education, actually, because we're not just teaching people stuff. We're like trying to help people create strategies to improve their lives. And that's really, if we can deliver on that, I think that we've done a good job. But I was thinking our attractor is actually not completely unique to us. Obviously, we are capitalizing on a system that existed long before personality hacker existed. We are primarily talking about personality types and models. Enneagram existed way before us. Obviously, it's incredibly ancient. And Myers-Briggs existed way before us. And a big piece of our attractor, and the reason why people are willing to, quote unquote, pay attention initially, is because we're talking about a subject they're already interested in. So we're capitalizing on something that the audience member already has an interest in. So just getting attention, just getting the attraction from people sometimes is not that difficult, especially if you're capitalizing on something that they already have interest in. You can see this in like people who go in health and wellness. People have an interest in their health. Maybe they have poor health or they have a pain point. And so people who are teaching those subjects or creating products and programs around it, like they are benefiting from a natural interest, which you want to do. You want to figure out what your audience is already interested in. But the ability to attract people is very different than the ability to retain their interest. And in interest retention means that you have to give something that's very unique to you. Like we're in an industry where I'm seeing people kind of pop up all over the place talking about personality types and talking about like even personal growth. But I think one of the reasons why we have an audience that stays with us is we're one of the few people who say, personality types are really cool and all, but it really is just an on-ramp for something else. we let you know, we're very transparent that we're smuggling personal growth through the vehicle of typology. And quite honestly, I think we've actually converted people. I think that people have come for typology advice or not just advice, but information. And then we've converted them into personal growth junkies, which is like legit one of my favorite things ever. Like that's really that's like, okay, I'm in the right place if I can do that. But that's our quote unquote unique selling proposition. And the retention is through that lens. It's like, are we actually legitimately helping people do better, be better, have better results in their life? And so the retention comes from the credibility that's established and built by giving people something that's hard to find, like really, really hard to find, actually, which is legit growth opportunities woven into the individualization of type, meaning that we're not just going like, hey, here's the 10 things you need to know to become a better person. We're going, so there's 10 things you need to know as an ENTJ, and they're different than the 10 things that the ISFJ needs to know. And that's nice, right? That's like unique. That's nice. So a bit of the retention too is you trying to figure out what is your unique selling proposition. What's something that after you've attracted attention, you are very unique in delivering this thing. And then when you figure out what it is that is uniquely attracting the audience to you, how can you over deliver on that? How can you be not just a one-to-one value, but massively over delivering? And what happens is if you are consistent enough at over delivering, you are way in the black with your audience. And that means when you mess up, which you invariably will do, they cut you some slack. I mean, we've recorded, how many hundreds of podcasts at this point? Over 300?
I think so. Yeah, 320 some odd, plus some question and answer ones. So
there is no way that we hit a home run on all of those podcasts. There have been stinkers in there. I know for a fact. I know it because I've gone back and listened to them and cringed. There have been terrible podcasts in there. Heck, maybe this is one of them. Maybe this is like the worst podcast we've ever created. But if we gave our all in all of these podcasts, if we really over-delivered, then when we have a stinker or two, people will forgive us. Somebody actually wrote a review that said that we said something that triggered them, that they couldn't even listen to the rest of the podcast. They just turned it off. They were like, they could not listen to it. And so they went to the next podcast and they had been binging it and they'd been listening to podcast after podcast after podcast. And then they got triggered and couldn't even finish it. And they're like, maybe Joel and Antonia addressed the thing that triggered me. I don't know, but I just couldn't finish it. And then I went to the next one and I just started binging and I was fine. And I would listen to podcast after podcast after podcast. So that one where we said the triggering thing that was just very objectionable to that person, they forgave us. Because it was sandwiched in between binged episodes that they loved. So it's like that is the great thing about over-delivering, is that you will take from your audience at times, right? Unintentionally, you will mess up. And it will be a hit against the relationship. And if you've only done one-to-one transactions, if you've made sure it's a perfect reciprocity, when you mess up, you're now in the red. But if you've over-delivered the entire time and given your all, you are so far in the black that hit is you're not in the red. You don't owe them anything. You're not in debt to them at all because you have given them so much that they can totally absorb it. So thinking of business relationships kind of like personal relationships, in that you want to give so much to the other person, not in a codependent weird way, not in like oh God, I'm not worthy. I have to give and give and give to my audience because I'm just not, a valuable human being. I mean, just in valuing them and giving to them and then realizing that they'll take care of you, right? If you're doing right by your audience, no matter what the product or service is, they'll do right by you.
So I said in the last episode that right now, time of this recording, is the best time to start a business on your side. If you want to start a personal business in your life, you have a global audience. If you've got an internet connection, you have a global audience or customer base. You have tons of third-party tools and platforms to help you. There's a lot of online trainings and resources to understand how business works. These are some principle and practical things to think about as you're potentially endeavoring to start your own enterprise. Thinking about business models, this idea of business to consumer or business to business, this idea of service versus products, the idea of platforms. Are you going to own your own platform and build it all yourself? Or are you going to augment and use other people's platforms? And the idea of new versus repeat customers, this idea of building a customer base that's sustainable over the long term can be very powerful. So these are some principles and some practical things to think about. Also, the books I recommended at the very beginning, Cash Flow Quadrant and Rich Dad, Poor Dad, are really great reframes. They're good philosophical ways to think in terms of business. And there's a ton of practical business books too that we probably have listed on our website, places that really help you get started in developing your own enterprise on your side. And I think you have what it takes. If you've got the creativity, the wherewithal, the stick-to-itness, that takes a lot. You got to have a lot of stick-to-itness to start your own business through the tough times. It's very possible and doable for you. It's more possible and doable for people now than ever before. And I think it's only going to get more that way.
Yeah, it's easy to talk yourself out of it. It's easy to have a lot of limiting beliefs. If you can get through the philosophical challenges and the emotional challenges, even the logistical challenges, there's a lot of opportunity on the other side. And that's one of the reasons why I'm going to bring it back to what I said at the beginning of the last podcast, which is it's also an extraordinary personal growth opportunity. Getting through and overcoming all of those obstacles makes you hardier. And if you look at it through the lens of the drama triangle versus the empowerment dynamic, which is a model that we've talked about in previous podcasts, so go check it out, it takes you from being a victim in the drama triangle into being creator in the empowerment dynamic, which is really nice. It's like creating a business, doing it for yourself, overcoming obstacles. It really illustrates how much agency we really have in the world. And that's hard. That's sometimes hard to kind of reconcile with. But I think that's one of the things that for me personally has been so rewarding. Because I came from a background that told me that I really couldn't do anything, particularly as a woman. I was raised in a very patriarchal cult that told me that I was not allowed to do anything except for being a worker bee. I didn't get a college education, right? I didn't go to university. I mean, I did for like 2 minutes, but nobody supported me and nobody helped me out. And so it was like one of the first things to go. And so as a person who was raised in a patriarchal cult who told me that women cannot do or be anything, and then ended up without a degree, I was very much at the mercy of my circumstances and day jobs, very much. And it wasn't until I chose to go out for my own into enterprise, start a business, get a business partner, show up using the talents and skills that I actually have. I mean, I don't know if it's a bad thing to tell people that I don't have a degree. I'm very autodidactical, but it doesn't really seem to matter to people once I tell them that. And maybe that's very discrediting. But building this business has made it so that I feel like that's not really an obstacle I have to worry about, right? I'm not really all that worried about it. I'm surrounded by people who do have degrees. I mean, Joel, you've got a master's. I like to think it balances us out. You have a master's and I have jack squat. But both of us pour our all into it. We figured out a whole bunch of stuff. I very much went from a victim frame where it was like I was at the mercy of the world. And now I really do believe that I have so much more power, control, and agency. And a big part of it is because of the lessons I've learned in building this business. So it doesn't mean that if you're a person who doesn't build a business or go out for yourself in enterprise, it doesn't mean anything, right? Like if you choose not to do that, if that's not your gig, that's perfectly fine. But if you're a person who desires it or wants it or flirts with the idea, but has a lot of limiting beliefs, has a lot of imposter syndrome, has a lot of questions around whether or not you can do it, I'm just going to say as a woman raised in a patriarchal cult who doesn't have a degree, there are a lot of opportunities out there. And I highly recommend that if this is something you want, you go for it.
Well, and you didn't have to wait for the world to change to accommodate you. You just went and made your own pathway through it, which I thought was fantastic.
Yeah. And we do have to acknowledge that the environment has a lot of influence on us. That is absolutely true. And sometimes we diminish our ability to influence our environment. So whether or not it's actually true, I think sometimes we can make it true just by wanting it bad enough. So my recommendation is that, again, if this is something that you are flirting with, I recommend giving it a go.
So we want to hear from you. We've been talking a lot about business the last 2 episodes. I'd like to, in the future, continue talking about some of these ideas and principles and even get more practical, like how to actually do some things, connect some things. But right now, you've been listening to this conversation, the last conversation, hopefully. What's coming up for you? What questions do you have? What ahas or comments do you have that you want to make? And quite certainly, what does that even mean? Certainly, we want to hear your story, your personal experience, and you can share that with us over at personalityhacker.com directly below this episode. We want to hear from you. Your voice matters.
I think it's quite certainly. I think that means something, and quite certainly. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. Our book is out. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it at all major book retailers, and you can leave us a rating and review on Amazon and Goodreads. That also helps us out a lot. It's very crediting, right? People see ratings, reviews, even if they're bad ones. They're like, this is a legit thing.
Stop having people give bad reviews.
Don't give bad reviews. But I'm saying that it's credit.
Please don't give a bad review. You just don't say anything. It's like Thumper from Bambi. If you don't have anything nice to say, just don't say anything at all, right?
That's true. That's true. If you don't like the book, don't say anything. And we have products and programs, as we've been talking about, that we have bound our energy and our information in the service of coaching into programs that are personal development oriented and through the lens of personality type. So they're tailored for you. If that's interesting to you, go to personalityhacker.com, look at our product catalog, and see if there's something that catches your eye.
Yeah, there's one I mentioned in the last episode, Hardwired for Wealth, which talks about your pathway to generating wealth based on your personality. So we tailor business advice and things to how you're wired, how your mind is constructed. It's called Hardwired for Wealth. You can check out our website too. And my name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
I think this one went long. I don't know. I'll have to check the time, but.
What's so funny is we were like, these can just be 20 or 30 minutes. It's going to be fine. And I'm like, no, we always do too much talking.
Yeah, it's true.
It's our core competency is just talking too much.
Yeah. All right. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.